Today in this first lecture we are going to talk about the research problem. So basically I am going to explain to you what a research problem is so that you may be able to understand how important the research problem is in doing a research. The reason why I begin with the research problem is precisely because many students, when they say I want to do a research, they will suggest a topic, which is fair enough. But you also should try to show me why is it a research problem. In other words, what is it in that topic that intrigues you, that gives you some difficulty, that raises some questions. Now therefore a research problem is basically either a statement or a question which speaks about a concern you have, a particular condition that you want to improve upon, or a troubling question that you find in the philosophical literature or generally in any scholarly literature. You want to understand a particular issue in a deeper way because of the questions that it raises to you, and you want to study it in detail, you want to investigate it. So you may state it in the form of a statement or a question. It is preferable that you state it in a form of a question. I gave you the example. What right now disturbs me, it raises a lot of questions in my mind, is how is it that we human persons are capable of monstrous violence when philosophically we speak of human nature as intrinsically good? Now, intrinsically good would mean that our nature is good in itself. It's not dependent on anything else to be good. By the fact of being human, we are good. That's what the meaning of intrinsically good. So when philosophy or many philosophers tell us that our nature is intrinsically good, how do I account for the monstrous violence that are manifested in many social realities? Now this, for example, is a research problem. Because this disturbs me, this troubles me, there is an apparent contradiction in what is said in the philosophical literature, but the actual life situation, the experience shows something else. We come across in our life this different kind of experience. So I would like to probe into the human nature, the claim that is made of human nature, while my experience goes against the claim that is made in philosophical literature. That is one example. There could be many examples we can think of. You, for one, you think of what bothers you, what bothers your mind. There could be many such issues that would bother our mind. So a good philosophy begins from our actual life experience, not raising some abstract questions. It begins from actual life experience, but of course the question leads us to some form of abstraction. But you don't just ask a question for the sake of asking, something that disturbs our mind, something for which we want to find an answer, something that intellectually stimulates me, something that drives me to look for answers. Now when we speak about philosophical issues, normally in philosophy we will think of issues broadly in these 5 branches of philosophy. Metaphysics, the study of reality. Epistemology, the study of human knowledge. Ethics, the study of human conduct, human behavior. Political philosophy, the study of humans organized into a political structure. Aesthetics, the study of beauty. So these are the different philosophical issues. Most of the philosophical problems will fall under any of these branches or 1 or 2 branches simultaneously. A question may fall in 1 or more branches as well, but normally it would be on one branch in predominance. Let me explain about each of these philosophical issues a little more in detail, because you are in the very beginning of your philosophy, and therefore a simple idea of that would help. Now, metaphysics basically is a question that concerns reality. When we speak about reality, it is a broad term. Reality is anything that is real, anything that exists. So it affirms the dimension of something that is existing or what makes something to exist. So metaphysics raises questions that are very similar to physics or physical science. The object of study can be sometimes very similar, but the perspectives adopted are very different. Now, for example, metaphysics may raise a similar question like that of physical science: what is matter? But science would raise this question: what is matter, from a pure observable point of view, that which can be observed by our empirical senses and then draw conclusions from that. So physical science, for example, would study a physical matter by the use of some scientific tools. I mean, scientific tools, when I say, what I mean here is the tools that are used for hard science or physical science. You may use for a matter which is of microscopic in nature, you would use a microscope, for example, a powerful one. You would use, for example, the study of star to know what it is, what is that material reality about. You would use a telescope for that matter. Now, metaphysics does not adopt the same approach as the physical science would approach. It would raise the similar question as that of science, but the approach it would adopt is always in terms of a rational inquiry into the question, what is matter? So a metaphysics would ask a question: how can I understand matter if I, a knowing person, is primarily using my mind to know it? So is mind able to grasp matter? From the mind point of view, what this matter could be? From the use of my mind, my faculty of thinking, my ability to think. It is not just the brain. Brain is again a physical reality. But the mind is not a physical reality. So how in my mind this understanding of matter is given? What is matter in that way of understanding from using my mind? How do time and change affect matter, for example? Is there a soul? A soul is something that is not a material reality. So, are there other realities, other things that exist other than matter? Like, for example, soul, it could be God, it could be things that are not material in nature. When I say material in nature, material things are normally known to us by our empirical senses. Again, if you are not familiar with the term empirical senses, it means the sense of sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of touch, the sense of smell, and the sense of movement, locomotive sense. So these are the 5 external senses that we normally attribute to human observatory skills. Now, we all speak about soul. Can I see it? Can I touch it? Can I smell it? No. None of these external senses can help me to know what it is. So does such non-material things exist? Are they real? Or for that matter, even God? Or what is a soul? Or what is God, for that matter? How soul and body are related? Now, these are different questions that metaphysics would address. So, metaphysics would raise question about the material reality. Yes, for example, the human person is a material reality, but it doesn't look at purely from the material point of view like science would do, physical science would do, but it looks at human person even from beyond the material point of view. And that is why it is metaphysics. Meta means that is beyond. Physics means that is of material thing. So it is beyond the material thing, beyond the material objects. So that would be a philosophical question. Now, most of these philosophical questions have been extensively asked, studied, and even today they are studied because they still have issues. They still pose a lot of questions, especially the relationship between body and soul. So you have this question, for example, that also affects our faith. What happens after death? What continues to exist? Is there a soul that would continue to live after death? Or would the body would also be able to somehow get back to life and live in relation to soul? So some of these questions, particularly from the Christian point of view, these things are even today talked about, perhaps not so much others. Now, epistemology again is a branch that deals with the human knowledge. Can we know? How do we know if we know? How do our senses really work? When I say I see something, what really happens in that process of seeing? How that communication happens between my sense of sight with my mind? So perception, by my seeing, how does it affect my knowledge? Has memory contributed to my knowledge process? What I knew from my previous experience, what I remember, what role does it play? How is the memory structured? How does it really function? Now remember, now this is not a study of the brain. Like a neurobiologist would study a brain and try to address that in terms of the different brain spots which are responsible, etc. No, it's not from that point of view. It's asking from a point of view which cannot be analyzed in the scientific laboratories. So that would be an epistemological question. Now we also have the question of right and wrong. What makes something right? What makes something wrong? Who can determine something to be right or wrong? Is what we think right or wrong objective always? Now the meaning of the word objective means it is independent of the subject. Whether I say it is right or whether you say it right, it doesn't matter. Is it in itself right or wrong? Independent of who says it. Sometimes we may think when so-and-so says, that would be then right. No. When it comes to morality, it doesn't matter who says it, where it is said, when it is said. None of these things matter. In itself, can something be right or wrong? That is the meaning of objective. Or according to the context and the situation, can morality change? What is right in one context, can it be wrong in another context? That would be subjective then. Again, the question of human freedom. Can we really determine right and wrong with our freedom? If we really don't have freedom, does it really matter to speak about morality? Because you cannot hold somebody responsible for doing something right or wrong if that person did not do it freely. After all, the person did not have control over his or her actions. So what is the relationship between human freedom and morality or moral action? These are some of the questions that ethics would raise. This is another philosophical area. This is called the practical philosophy, whereas metaphysics and epistemology would be normally considered as a theoretical philosophy. Political philosophy is again concerned with good life like ethics, but with relation to the social life. What would be a good life in the social context? So how do we learn to live with one another in a society? What would be a proper relationship between an individual person and the political state? So these are some of the questions that political philosophy would address. I am not exhausting all the questions. I am just giving some examples of these issues that we might discuss in our philosophy classes. But these are not exhaustive list. The list can be more. Aesthetics is about the beauty or the art. How do we know something is beautiful? Is art an activity of the intellect, or it is merely a representation of the objective reality, what is outside of us? Can we have an objective standard of judging something to be beautiful, something to be artistic? Or again, art is a matter of subjective preference. Beauty is a matter of subjective preference. Is there any role that mathematics can play in art? So these are the questions that from the point of view of aesthetics people would be raising, people have raised, people do raise even today, and then people will continue to raise, and then they may come up with different ideas about it. So these are at least the 5 major branches in philosophy where some of these philosophical issues can be probed into, can be studied, can be investigated. But this sound rather very abstract and notional. But then the moment you have a research problem, you need to look for what is known as a problem statement. Now, what is a problem statement? You need to place the research problem in a context. The context can mean 2 things. One is the context of that problem itself, how that problem has been studied in the past by different thinkers. That would be the context of the problem itself. So what do I already know about that? That means what other people have already said about this problem. For example, the question I raised right in the beginning, I come back to that. How is it we human beings can exert monstrous violence when philosophers generally say that human nature is intrinsically good? Now, I'm not the first one to have raised this question. There are others who have raised this question. How have they tried to resolve this? What have they tried to tell us about this? So what can I learn from them? So that is what I can already know from others. Without me trying to find the solution on my own, I also look for what others have said about it. So this is what we can already know. But the context also would mean my context, not also the context of the problem, my context. This is equally important because the way others have responded to this problem is in their lived context, which can be very different from my living context today. Because the type of violence I speak about today may be different. The understanding of what is a good human nature could have changed today. So therefore, it is not necessary that my context would be the same as that of others who have discussed this problem before. So that I need to first place the research problem in a proper context, in both sense of the term context. Now I need to ask myself, now this is what others have said, I know about it. Now what are the things I still need to know besides what others have said? Or what are the things that I find is not quite convincing to me what others have said, therefore I need to add to it, I need to nuance that. So what is that issue I want to address now? What is that I need to know more? Then I also need to say, why is it important? Because you can just do it for the sake of fun, or you really have something to contribute by way of your research to others who are engaging in the similar kind of research, or generally for the betterment of human life for that matter. So why do I need to do it? Why do I need to know about it? And finally, you also need to have what really you intend to find out at the end of your study. That is called the objectives. So, placing the problem in context, description of the real issue, relevance of the problem, and then objectives of the research. If I had to put it in the question form, what do I already know? Know. What I need to know further, why do I need to know, and what do I intend to find out at the end of my study. So this is what is known as a problem statement. You have a research problem, now try to ask these questions when you have the research problem. That will help you to do your study, your research better and more efficiently. So what therefore is the purpose of a problem statement? At the end of your research, you will write a paper, a research paper, and you normally publish it. That is how you, when you read a journal, you will find many essays, many articles. So when you publish, it is very important that you need to state why this is important. So you are introducing to the reader why this is important. That in order to introduce to the reader why it is an important, you should have a clear purpose of problem statement. You need to have a clear problem statement, and you should be able to say the purpose of the problem statement is this, this, and this. Well, you also try to show it has a particular context, and then I am limiting my study within that parameters, those parameters of my context. So for example, if you are studying about the violence is again too vast. So I would say I would limit to human violence against other humans. Now again, it can be very vast. Okay, now let me try to nuance it. Violence against people who are different from us. Now I am saying about people who are not of a particular group as I belong to, people who don't belong to my religion, people who don't belong to my caste, people who don't belong to my linguistic community, people who don't belong to my sexual orientation, people who don't belong to my ideology or my philosophy. They are different from us. So basically you are now nuancing, you are limiting the parameters of what is to be investigated. So that would be a manageable research problem. You also provide a certain framework so that how your findings can be relevant, how the information that you provide can be relevant. So within that framework you are operating. What is relevant for you is within that framework of the question that you are asking. So this is the purpose of a problem statement basically. Now what are some of the characteristics of a research problem? RP stands for research problem. It's an acronym, a short form. A good research problem should reflect on important issues or needs. If you read any good philosophical work, it may sometimes seem very abstract to you. The reason is we have not understood the research problem that person raised it at that point in time in his or given context, which was of some important issue or need. So that is why the history of philosophy is important. The history of philosophy is not merely to know who said what, which philosopher said what. Now you are right now doing a history of philosophy, but why did that philosopher speak about this in the first place? To situate that philosopher in his historical context or her historical context. Then you would better appreciate it. Otherwise, some of these things may seem very abstract and dry if you have not figured out that that person has a particular need to raise that question in his or given context. So also your research should be reflecting an important issue or a need for you to study that particular topic that you have chosen. And normally a good research, one of the characteristics is that it should be based on factual evidence. In other words, it cannot be hypothetical. You cannot have an assumption of something. In other words, you should validate it with some justification. You cannot build things on assumptions. You should have evidence that are factual. Another important characteristic, it must be manageable and relevant. When I say manageable, you cannot choose a research problem which you cannot manage. People may sometimes end up choosing a research problem that your whole lifetime may not be enough to study it. Take a problem which is important, but at the same time which you can do enough research within the given time and see whether it has some relevance. Now, to give an example, what would you consider as a good news item? A good news item, for the most part, is something that would report a real issue of social importance. For example, if there is an issue that is going on with regard to people's rights, if some people's rights are violated in an organized way, then the news should report that. That would be a good news item because that is relevant. The news reporter might choose not to do that and might end up spending the time on showing some, some fan club of some important personality, a celebrity. Would that be relevant at a time when human persons are having, the particular community, a particular nation is undergoing a lot of crisis? It may not be. So therefore it becomes irrelevant. So when you choose a philosophical problem, choose something that is relevant, that addresses the concerns of that society in which you live in. You don't need to exactly repeat what Plato did, because what Plato's concern in his society was very different from our concerns in our society. We may learn from Plato, but we cannot exactly ask the same research question as Plato asked in his time. Plato had a different context than we do today. Some of them may be similar, but they are not always similar. You also must be having a meaningful hypothesis, which you can verify, we can test it. Now, what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is an answer you already have, but you don't have proof for it enough. Now, for example, for the research problem I had right in the beginning, how is it that we humans are capable of monstrous violence when philosophers generally hold the view that we are intrinsically good by nature? Now, I have a simple answer. The answer is human persons are not really intrinsically good. They are as evil as good they can be. Now, this is an answer. I already have an answer, but I don't have enough proof to argue this. So, this is a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a unverified thesis, something that is not established yet. Now, I have this hypothesis and my study will be guided by this hypothesis, but with an open mind. It's not that I have the answer already fixed and I by all means want to prove it, but my analysis, my study, my research will be guided by this hypothesis. And I might find sometimes my hypothesis is wrong. So, I might end up with another thesis which says exactly the opposite hypothesis. Or my study with an open mind, when I do, may confirm my hypothesis. Now my hypothesis become an actual thesis, meaning to say that I have sufficient arguments to show that we are neither good nor bad in itself. We are capable of both at the same time. So, and I have arguments for that. And these are the arguments. Now that becomes a thesis. So these are some of the characteristics of research problem. Now I will skip this formulating the research problem. This is a simple practical tips that you would look at that. There is one important aspect, that is determine variable relationships. Now variable relationship, what is a variable? A variable is a term, is a word which I would like to study there. Now there are two variables that I used. There are many variables, two are very important. They are related in that research problem I raised. Violence is definitely one variable. The another variable is human nature. There could be another variable that is good, the goodness. Now what are the relationship between these concepts, these terms? We will discuss more about it. So I will skip this as well when I take up some real research questions and show what is a variable, how one is related to another. So that will give a little bit of experience, hands-on training to you. A good research problem would imply your question may have number of different answers, potential answers. And all these things must be able to be tested, and it should be open-ended. These answers you have, you must be able to be tested, you must be flexible, it should be open-ended. You should have sufficient evidence. Evidence normally in philosophy is the reasonable logical arguments to address it. You may be able to break them into parts and analyze them. It is precise and clear, and a good research problem should also be narrowed down to a specific length of a paper. So if you are doing just a paper for about 5,000 words, you cannot have a research problem which may lend itself to volumes of books. So you also need to say why your particular answer is important. These are some of the ways by which you can say how do you have a good research problem that is worth for research. In simple terms, if you want to make your research problem, somebody must be say, well, that sounds interesting. Well, that sounds relevant. Well, it is focused and it is researchable. You can do a good research on that. So these are some of the things that people might normally find it to be an impressive research problem. So these are the things that I need to say today. I know I had a little, I went a little fast, and I know it was a little theoretical because it's only the introductory part. So I will try to now take up each of these things, and then with the following lectures, which we will have from 7th onwards, I will be giving you regular exercise as to give a topic and then ask you to do it then and there. Not for marks there, but for learning, and then come back and then address you back with your answers you have there. So that would make it easy. It's more like, we collectively do the work. It's like doing the exercise together. So I will give my feedback on that. So that may make it easier for you. So for the moment, it is important that you have some general background. If you might have missed something, either because of audio quality, or it could be some of the terms are difficult. But be that as it may, we shall take it up now with the question answer.